You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button.
Up to Oxford, get a closer look at the Rebs, of course, Tigers and Ole Miss, 5 p.m. Saturday in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, the latest rendition of the Magnolia Bowl. Welcome in Neal McCready from Rebel Grove. Neal, we appreciate the time. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Appreciate you having me. Always good to be with you guys.
Absolutely. So, Neal, look, I kind of want to start just with a vibe check in a sense. I mean, Ole Miss off to the 3-0 start, a lot of hype, a lot of social media hype surrounding Alabama. They go in, it's a tightly contested first half, not so much in the second half. What's kind of the vibes around Ole Miss and around Oxford after that game?
Yeah, I don't know how much social media hype there was. It was just generated by one person who did all the hype. He sort of set himself up for that. After that game, it should have been sobering to Ole Miss people. There was a lot of talk about going in there and winning. A lot of people talking about winning big. A lot of national media picked them to win. They had not really played. They had not really been tested yet. They played Tulane, but Pratt didn't play that day. They had played Georgia Tech, and the score looked different than what the reality was. The reality was that was a one-score game in the fourth quarter. So, I mean, I think coming out of the Alabama game, there's a sobering reality that, A, this is not going to be easy, and that's what I think some people were starting to think, and that, B, this team has flaws, some significant flaws that unless they can fix or find workarounds that are probably going to be fatal at times.
So looking at the team as a whole, as they prepare to welcome in LSU, one of the obvious, talking points throughout the offseason and leading in was quarterback position. Who is it going to be? It ends up being Jaxson Dart. What'd you make of his performance so far through the first 4 weeks?
Oh, I think he's been terrific. I think he's been maybe one of the 2 or 3 bright spots on their team. I never understood a lot of the quarterback thing in the first place. When they brought Spencer Sanders in, it was sort of it was a head scratcher, I guess is what I'm looking for. They brought Walker Howard in, made total sense. You needed a quarterback for the future, a guy that was, had a lot of eligibility left. This is Spencer Sanders' final year. You assumed when they brought him in that he brought him in to be the guy, to be the starter. And I think there was an expectation that maybe Jaxson would leave. He didn't. He stayed. He competed. He won the job. He's played really well. The problem for him has been some of his receiver targets have had a hard time staying healthy. They've not been able to establish the running game. Jaxson Dart's the leading rusher on this team, and up front, it's the big question mark with Ole Miss this year. That offensive line has just not performed the way that a lot of people thought that it would with 4 returning starters, and that's been the problem for them. He's gotten hit a lot. He's been pressured a lot. He's had to escape and run a lot, and they've had to use him as a design runner a lot to try to establish the running game, and they've put a lot on his plate.
What has gone so wrong with the offensive line, Neal? Because you just mentioned it. I mean, 4 returning starters. I mean, what has happened there that it's been such a struggle for them? I mean, I know Lane Kiffin said it earlier this week when he was asked about the run game, where he goes, well, it's not like we're a team that hasn't been able to run the football in the past, or a program that hasn't been able to run the football in the past. They have been. What has gone so wrong there up front?
It's a great question. I'm not sure I completely know the answer. They're getting beat on the perimeter. They're getting beat in the A gaps. They've made some adjustments. They've changed starters at left tackle. Jaden Williams is out. Victor Kern's in, the Washington transfer. He's been fine. The UAB transfer, Cedric McGee's playing left guard. He's been fine. Jeremy James is coming back from an injury. He's playing guard. I think he's more of a natural tackle. He wants to play tackle. Their center is beat up a little bit. But all of that being said, they just don't appear to have a lot of chemistry up front. They're committing, especially at the right tackle. Micah Pettis has been a holding machine. He'll have his hands full on Saturday with the LSU's electric front. And Lane's right. Look, if you think about his teams, not just his Ole Miss teams, but going back to Alabama, to USC, to FAU, whatever the case may be, they've always been able to run the football. That's what they do. We in the media sometimes do the whole, they throw it a lot, they're pass happy and all that stuff. It's really not true. They've established the run. You look at his Ole Miss teams, and statistically, they've been at or near the top of the SEC in most rushing categories at the end of the season. This year, that's not been the case. They've just not been able to establish it. And look, when you build your offense off the running game and you can't run it, well, you know the rest. Everything else gets super hard. And throw in some injuries to wide receivers and some continuity type things, and it can get kind of rough.
So I think the obvious place for me to go then next with that is Quinshon Judkins. And I think everyone's really wants to say is, where is he? But I mean, he is there. It's just been a struggle getting him going. So how do they get him going more? Is it more in the passing game if they can't get it going up front? Because I mean, look, I don't have to tell you, Quinshon Judkins is electric. Like, that's a guy you got to get the ball in his hands, right?
Well, he was electric last year. That was certainly the case. So far this year, I think he's been banged up a little bit. He has not been electric. He's had a hard time getting going. He doesn't appear to have some of the wiggle that he had last year. He's gotten a little bigger, not in a fat way, but he's gotten a little stronger. You know, I think sometimes these guys, after that freshman year, they get in the weight room and maybe they get too much in the weight room, and you can get a little stiff. And I'm not saying he is, but he doesn't look the same, and that might be the injury. It might just be some stuff. He got banged up at the end of that Tulane game a few weeks ago, and really hasn't been super effective. He had a couple of runs against Alabama where he was starting to look like his old self, so maybe he's on the verge of a breakthrough. They desperately need that. If he can't break through, look, no one talked about it because of the year that Judkins had. But they had Zach Evans a year ago, and there was a number of games where Zach Evans was super effective for them and a real change of pace. And he was certainly the type of back that if you were a defensive coordinator, you had to prepare for him because he was a game breaker. And if he got loose in space, he was really difficult to bring down. And I think that took some pressure off Judkins. And I think it stopped offensive coordinators from being able to completely key in on Quinshon. And now they can, and they have, and they've been able to neutralize him.
Talking with Neal McCready on Twitter at Neal McCready. Neal, you've mentioned it a couple times throughout this interview here about the injuries on the outside to the wide receivers. I'm curious about a few of them. I know obviously Zachary Franklin made a return last week for the first time, very limited. It looked like he was getting more involved in practice this week, as well as Trey Harris, who went down in that Tulane game and had surgery and is already back. Any new update you can tell us on those two guys?
No, they're super quiet about injuries here. It's kind of the antithesis of the way Brian Kelly treats it at LSU. They don't talk about it. Harris, he played, I think, 5 snaps at Alabama, but he wasn't anywhere near himself. He was just very limited, kind of red zone packages. I don't know. I don't know whether how much he'll be back. I don't think it's realistic to expect that he's going to be 100% a week later. Caden Prescorn, the tight end, made his debut last week. Looked gassed by the end. Looked pretty sluggish. He'd been in a boot for basically a month, so that's to be expected. You don't just play your way into playing shape with one game. You mentioned Zachary Franklin. He did play 60 snaps, so that's probably a sign that he's pretty close to ready to go and feeling good. So he's, of those 3, he's probably the one that I would say is closest to 100%. But there's not a lot of chemistry there. There's not a lot of continuity there because those guys haven't played. And here we are, week 5, and you're going up against an SEC team, and you're trying to make those things happen. And those guys didn't play against Mercer. They didn't play against Tulane. They didn't play against Georgia Tech, and you can see it.
I want to flip sides of the ball now and go to the defense. Just kind of leave it pretty open-ended. The biggest strength you've seen so far through 4 weeks for the Ole Miss defense.
They're just so much better coached. Pete Golding has them playing a 4-man front. They're far more fundamentally sound. They're in the right place more often. They're tackling better. They just appear to like this scheme better than they liked the one a year ago, which was a little bit more passive, a little bit more bend and try not to break, and you bent and you bent and you bent, and over the course of a day that wore you out a little bit. This one's more aggressive. They're getting in the right gap more often than they did a year ago. There was times last couple of years where you would just see, the C's part, and it was assignments blown. They've minimized that. The one thing about this defense is that it doesn't have the speed guys that a lot of times you see in the SEC. I think Pete Golding would like to have a faster defense, but they're working on that on the recruiting end. The one guy to watch, and you saw a bunch of him against Alabama last week, is Suntarine Perkins, the 5-star recruit that they got out of Raleigh, Mississippi a year ago. Everybody recruited him. They used him as a spy a little bit on Jalen Milroe. He was really effective. They used him in some different ways that just sort of utilized his speed and athleticism, and he was kind of a weapon for Ole Miss defensively. And I think you'll see more of him against LSU and then on down the road. He's obviously a guy that they're super excited about.
Are you kind of expecting the same role for him, given Jaden Daniels' ability to run the ball as well?
Yeah, I would think so. But you got to keep in mind he's a true freshman. I think you can, if you throw too much at him, all of a sudden you're complicating things. I would think they'll use him a good bit in that role, but now LSU's seen it. So LSU's prepared for it.
Fair.
So you're going to get some of that chess game. The problem when you use a spy is you can take a defender out of the pass game. The opposing offenses can scheme that away, right? Where you pay for that. You pay for the guy just kind of floating there, waiting for the quarterback to commit, and downfield there's a hole in the zone, or there's an opening for you to do, with routes, you can run somebody open. So you have to be careful with doing a whole lot of that. And look, at this point, Jaden Daniels has seen just about every defense someone's going to throw at him. I'm a big Daniels fan. I think he's terrific. And so I'm sure they'll throw some different looks at him, and that'll be one that they'll throw. And he's a really effective player in that manner. He can close fast. He's very athletic. He's a good tackler. He's a physical player. But no, I don't think they'll just 70 snaps line up Perkins as a spy and say chase Jaden Daniels around. I doubt that's the strategy.
A couple more with Neal McCready here before I let you go. You mentioned lack of speed. Would you categorize that as the biggest weakness for the Ole Miss defense, or is there something else that stands out?
Yeah, it's probably that. It's just, over the last few years, that's not where they've recruited a lot of, star-studded players. They've had a lot of success on the offensive side of the ball. They've not had as much on defense. They were really relying on the transfer portal. They signed more than 20 transfer portal guys on defense alone in this last cycle. So it's just a bunch of guys that they're trying to fit and find. And again, Golding's done a terrific job, but this will be their biggest test to date. I think the LSU offense is elite. I know everybody down there is worried about defense and defensive backs, and I get it, but I think that LSU offense is elite. I think you saw that last week with their ability to hold serve against Arkansas when Arkansas got going in the second half. Look, if LSU's offense has a bad drive, a turnover, anything that could have ended differently in Baton Rouge last week. The fact that offense just stayed on schedule, possession after possession after possession, was, I would hope LSU fans appreciated it, because that game could have gone the other way. I think KJ Jefferson's terrific now. I mean, he's one of the more underrated players in the league, and probably LSU's defensive staff agrees with that after what happened Saturday. That LSU offense, man, it's special. Yeah,
I think we all saw how massive it was in the game last year that he didn't play KJ Jefferson as opposed to this time around. So he was certainly dynamic. I don't want to say he didn't miss Rocket Sanders, but it was almost like, they put up 31 points even without him. KJ made up so much of the missing of him. Last one, Neal, if there's a blueprint for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss at home to win the game, how do they do it?
Well, LSU is going to score points, and so you have to hold serve. You've got to run the football. You can't have turnovers. You've got to score with them. You've got to keep the pressure on them. You got to run tempo. You got to get into that defensive secondary. You've got to get LSU playing maybe a little tentative defensively, worrying about giving up big plays. You got to stay ahead of the chains. You got to stay. It's got to be 3rd and 3, not 3rd and 13. It's basic stuff. And then look, at some point, if Ole Miss is going to win this game, they've got to create a couple of turnovers. They've got to get that LSU offense off the field, off schedule, and maybe do something where you get up 10-14 and you get LSU chasing points. Although Arkansas got up 10 and they just came right back. I mean, touchdown, got the ball back, touchdown. That's what they are. And I think if you're Ole Miss, that has to be your concern. Is that I just think the LSU offense is so much more explosive than Ole Miss's is.
He is Neal McCready, Rebel Grove, on Twitter at Neal McCready. Covers Ole Miss. Y'all give him a follow, especially with the coverage here this week leading into the Magnolia Bowl. Neal, we appreciate the time as always. Thanks, and we'll do it again.
Be happy to. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.